Hi, I'm Joyce Harper, Professor of Reproductive Science at the Institute for Women's Health at University College London. Welcome to Season 3 of my podcast, Why Didn't Anyone Tell Me This? This season, we'll be diving into topics that explore how to achieve good health and happiness. I'll be speaking with leading experts who will provide evidence-based advice and debunk some of the many myths around our health. Additionally, I'll be having conversations with individuals who bring unique perspectives through their lived experiences. In Season 3, we'll cover a diverse range of topics, including reproductive anatomy, inspiring female icons, chronic health conditions, factors that influence our well-being, and global women's health issues. I really hope you enjoy Season 3 of Why Didn't Anyone Tell Me This? Well, we have finally got to the end of the mini-series about reclaiming joy, and I really could have gone on and on, but I am going to pause about reclaiming joy now, probably until January, and I have a whole list of people who have already agreed to come on the podcast to talk more about reclaiming joy. But today, to finish the series, who else to do that but my dear friend, Dr. Nerina Ramlakhan, and we have titled this podcast, Reclaiming Joy. Nerina is a physiologist, sleep expert, author, and keynote speaker who is dedicated to helping people and organizations to thrive, sleep more deeply, and live more joyfully. Nerina spent a decade conducting sleep and wellness programs at Nightingale Hospital in London, coaches on burnout prevention at Ashridge Business School, and is the original founder of BUPA's corporate wellbeing solutions. Nerina works with individuals as well as numerous corporate clients from various industries, including sport, such as Chelsea Football Club. And she is particularly interested in how, post-pandemic, organizations and individuals can thrive rather than merely survive. Her recently published fourth book, Finding Inner Safety, suggests that an important way forward in these volatile, uncertain, and complex times is to tap into our deepest sources of resilience and inner safety. Nerina is the author of 3 other books, all about sleep, which we will be talking about today. And her work is featured in many newspapers, on TV, on radio. She is really a regular in the media. Welcome, Nerina.
Thank you, Joyce. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today. I'm delighted.
And this is very special because Nerina and I have known each other for over 40 years. It's terrible to say that. We obviously met when we were like 2. No, we didn't. We met when we were doing our PhDs together at King's College London. So, Nerina, my first question to my guests is always about their career. And for you, tell us about from your PhD and what led you to your brilliant work now on sleep and helping people thrive.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. I did dance around a bit in my career, and I'm using the word dance because I know we both like talking about dance, don't we? But I think I always had this feeling that I wasn't really meant to be an academic. It wasn't really me. But I did this PhD, and I had a brief stint of lecturing at University of Westminster. It was Polytechnic of Central London at the time. I did a postdoc at UCL. I worked with the Medical Research Council, but I wasn't really a theorist. I wanted to work with real human beings. So eventually I found myself in the City of London, in the Square Mile, in a clinic in Moorgate, measuring the health of city professionals. And while we don't want to be talking about age and things like this, it was back in the 90s. And it was back then, we're that generation that knew the world before technology and then when technology landed. And I was there just at the cusp of when technology landed. And I noticed it was having an impact on the physiology of my clients. I was wearing a white lab coat, was measuring the health of people like employees from Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch, and people like that. And I noticed that something about the speed of the world was impacting on their energy levels, their stress levels, and particularly their sleep. I noticed that I had a real obsession with talking to people about sleep, and it would get even the most tight-lipped corporate employee or investment bank trader would open up if I said, how did you sleep last night? If I asked them, how do you feel joyful, or how do you feel, full stop, they would never answer that. But asking someone, how did you sleep last night, was an invitation for them to talk about all sorts of things, because we sleep the way we live. And so I noticed I was going more and more into these avenues of talking about sleep, and maybe this was a subconscious drive, which came from my own issues with sleep, which I'd had since a baby. But anyway, there I am, measuring the health of people, noticing that I have a skill for talking about sleep and resilience and energy and stress. And then I started being invited to do keynote presentations. I was headhunted to work at a psychiatric clinic, which I had some history with, as you'll know, and writing my first book, Tired But Wired, which landed me on the couch with Philip Schofield and Holly Willoughby. On This Morning, I shouldn't probably say it that way, but you know what I mean. I ended up on This Morning doing a lot of stuff on sleep, and I was sort of catapulted into the world of well-being, and for sleep in particular. I became known as a sleep expert, particularly during COVID when so many people couldn't sleep. So I am called a sleep expert, but I do more than that. I do help people to thrive. I'm a physiologist. I think your PhD was in biochemistry, oh no, pharmacology. Yes, and mine was physiology. So I have this obsession with helping people to understand the workings, what a joy it is to understand how your physiology works and to work with the physiology of your body, and to make it palatable and make it accessible to everyone, whether it's your daily rag reader, not that people read so many newspapers these days, or whether it's someone in an academic environment. I love making science accessible and practical. So that's what I do.
Fantastic, fantastic. So many brilliant things, and you really started working in all this before. Now obviously it's very trendy to be talking about all these things, but you were there before it was trendy. So we're going to come back to sleep in a moment, because that's obviously so important to our lives and our well-being. But you are the last podcast in the series this year called Reclaiming Joy. And I'm going to do another series next year, because I love doing this, and I'm quite obsessed with it. I think it's so important for our life. But let's dissect this apart. This is a hard one. Nerina, what is joy?
Do you know what? I'm going to confess something. I'm going to confess that before I came on this podcast, I Googled it, because I thought, how does one explain this kind of ineffable bubbling up of energy that comes, I believe, from deep within us, that is so unique to each of us? It means something for each of us, and we all kind of know what it means. I mean, I know when my dog looks joyful. When a little child looks joyful. I think as adults, we start to lose that, by the way, which is why your podcast and this series is so important. And it fills me with joy that you're going to do another series on joy. But how does one define it? Well, if we think about it from a consciousness point of view, and I love the work of the late psychiatrist, Dr. David Hawkins. I have piles of his books. And he actually measured the frequency of emotions. And so he measured emotions from grief, sadness, sorrow, anger, courage, peace, and joy. And joy is one of the highest frequency emotions. It is one of the highest states of energy that we can experience. And it can be exalted and euphoric and ecstatic and orgasmic, and it can also be quiet and peaceful. And I had a quiet feeling of peaceful joy yesterday when I was out in the garden. All I was doing was weeding, and I had my dog with me and the cat with me, and I was weeding while listening to your podcast on singing. I thought, I feel really joyful. There's nothing major going on here. Sorry, no, I'm not dissing your podcast, but I was just feeling good in my skin, and a bubbling up of energy which went beyond happiness. I felt joyful. I don't know if I've answered your question, but I'd really invite all of your listeners to ask themselves, and that's what you're doing in your series. But I think it's something that's unique to all of us, but it is a high energy state that can also be peaceful and quiet. You know, does that answer your
Yeah.
question? Anywhere near to answering?
While you were when you were saying that you Googled it, I thought that's a great idea. So I've put it in Chat GPT, and Chat
Of
GPT
course you did.
ChatGPT says joy is a deep feeling of happiness, delight, or
Yeah.
contentment that often arises
Yes.
spontaneously, not always tied to specific
Yes.
external circumstances, which is what you said. You were gardening with your pets, listening to one of my podcasts, and that feeling of joy. And I know I've been just driving the car sometimes or walking along, and sometimes just felt a gush. I love the word gush of joy. I thought, wow, I feel so great. And
Yeah.
when you knew me,
Mm.
when you first knew me, you always know me, but when you first knew me, I used to hate my name. I thought my name was what an old fashioned name. I always had an Auntie Joyce, but I'm young and why am I called Joyce? But now I've embraced the joy part of my name.
I
And
love it. I
yeah,
love it.
and I love it.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that joy is going to be different for different people, isn't it? So what I think is very important is that people need to figure out what brings them joy, not their partner or their
Yes.
children or their parents or their siblings or their friends. So what do you think about that?
Mm.
How do we find our joy, what makes us joyful, not anyone else?
Mm. I think we have to get better, and I think it's a particularly pertinent question given the, the the pace of our life today in today's world and what's going on in our world. And what I'm hoping is that this conversation can reach many young people, because I think young people in particular are feeling particularly joyless and lonely and hopeless. And it's not just an opinion. This is based on some solid mental health statistics. That if you look at, one of the projects that I'm involved in is suicide prevention, and mental health, and particularly for young people. And I'm seeing, the mental health statistics and loneliness in young people is frighteningly and horribly high. So I think that people need to start having more conversations about joy, and we need to encourage ourselves to ask ourselves, step outside of the box, step outside of the world of social media, where people are looking at other people and thinking, okay, they're doing that and they look so joyful. Actually, what is joy for me? And I know that you're an avid festival goer, and I've been to some festivals. I spoke at some festivals today. The last one I spoke at, I really didn't enjoy myself. There was too much. It was extremely hot. I didn't want to be there, and something happened. I was speaking on the main stage, and then I was doing a book signing, and I got a phone call, and it was from my dog walker who's saying, "You haven't left a key for me to pick the dog up." And I thought, oh gosh, I'm going to have to rush home and go and let the dog out. I got home and I thought, what would bring me the greatest joy right now is not to go back to the festival, which I'd planned to do, but actually go for a walk in the woods with my dog, which is what I did. And I had a really wonderful rest, and I went swimming in the river later. And I think we have to ask ourselves, now I can't imagine you, hell no, walking out of a festival and not coming back. But me, because I'm a bit of an introvert as well as an extrovert, having been very extrovert, I'd spoken there the day before. I needed the quiet joy of being an introvert, which is I needed quiet, I needed nature, I needed not even music on while I was walking in the green, and I needed my dog with me, and I needed to be in the water in the river, not with any other swimming groups. So I think we need to ask ourselves, what does it mean for me? And that requires the courage to step outside of social media norms. And I feel really fierce about this. Step outside, put your technology away, and listen deeply to yourself, and listen to what your belly tells you, listen to what your heart tells you, listen to that uprising of emotion. I know that when I feel joy, sometimes tears start to come out, and maybe sometimes even my nose runs a bit, which is really unpleasant. But you know it's a funny kind of movement of energy which comes from the depths of me, and that's what I have learned about myself and joy, and it has taken me some decades to get to that place. But please, listeners to this amazing podcast, learn how to listen, and listen to yourself, and listen to the sensations in your body, and it will tell you whether something is just you towing the line for likes, or whether it's a genuine somatic embodied experience of joy.
Interesting what you said about
Get off your
crying.
soapbox now.
No, we're going on a soapbox day. Interesting what you said about crying. I was at my PhD student's Nepalese wedding on Saturday, and when all the family came in and they were all singing and dancing, and they all had little photos of the bride and the groom, that like the mask that they held up. And I did. You just start crying, don't you? And it was pure tears of
Yeah,
happiness. I was just
yeah,
overcome by the
yeah.
joy of everybody in the room. There was hundreds of people,
Mm,
and it's amazing. But
mm.
you're so right. We've got to figure this out for ourselves. And listen, the festival, yeah, okay. I do love a festival, and I know it's not everyone's thing. And you mentioned cold water swimming. Lots of people told me they can't think of anything worse. And this is why in this podcast,
Yes.
in this series, I've covered what people might think is a real weird list of topics. So we've done solo women traveling, we've done hiking,
Mm,
singing,
mm,
drumming,
mm.
and sound baths. And next year, I'm telling you, I've already lined up things like more on. Oh, we did food as well. We've done food in nature with the Fell foodie Harrison Ward, and I've already lined up for next year, which I was going to do this year, but I thought this series is getting so long. So next year, I want to talk about sex again. I like talking about sex. We're going to talk sex. I am going to talk about wellness festivals with Amber, who runs the big retreat. I'm going to talk about what else? Breath work. Lots of other fantastic things were lined up for next. Oh, laughing as well. Laughing. We're going to do one about laughing. So
Mm,
and
mm.
and for me, I did a course a few years ago with my wonderful twinny, we call ourselves, Miriam Akhtar, who wrote the Little Book of Happiness, and she said on that course that when we wake up in the morning, think of something today that will bring us some joy and happiness, and it could be I'm just going to read my book for 10 minutes. I'm going to go for a walk outside for 10 minutes. I'm going to do some gardening, whatever that may be. We need to think for ourselves. So it's so important, isn't it, Nerina?
It is really important, and I would love it if in your series you can also do something for the sensitives, because I think there's a lot of pressure now with the movement towards in spirituality and ascension, and it's often thought of as being very high energy, and even with breath work, because I've been doing breath work for about 20 years now. And I've done the Wim Hof programs, I've done the one-day workshops, over a decade ago. And that's now all very, very popular. I remember going into a well-known investment bank 23 years ago and doing breath work with them, and the feedback, and I included it in a stress management workshop. And the feedback was they love all the stuff, but can you not do the weird breathing stuff? And now it's all over the place. But I think what's happening is that the pendulum has swung very far out towards extremely high energy, um, uh, possibly quite loud things for people who want to be out in those spaces. But what we are seeing is a lot of young people, especially I'm seeing a lot of Gen Zs, millennials as well, and Gen Alphas coming up and coming, who have very sensitive nervous systems, very sensitive. And we're seeing this with a lot of neurodivergence as well, where they cannot tolerate being in a lot of noise. Holotropic breathing would not be good for breath work, would not be good for them. And I think to also include in your series, dare I say, this movement towards more silence, this movement towards people doing darkness retreats, the movement towards people going to monasteries, people doing 3 days of Vipassana no speaking retreats. Because I think there's, and the pendulum will adjust itself. And I do love a festival as well, and I love dancing. And you know this about me, I pendulate back and forth, and that's probably why I was once diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which I don't consider myself. But I can touch high extremes of high energy, as well as I can go into very quiet states, very, very, very quiet states. And I'm just mindful that joy needs to be embodied, it needs to be grounded. And we can do ecstatic, but it needs to be embodied as well. And so I was just going to throw that piece in there, because I'm seeing so many young people who are giving themselves a hard time because they look on social media and they see their friends going off to festivals, but they themselves are not the people who can do that. I have a daughter like that myself. And I really, we've just got back from holiday, and I was the one that wanted to find a nightclub. I was the one that wanted to join the cycling tour. I was the one that wanted to do all the things, and she was the one that wanted the quiet. And she's 21, and it made me rest, but it also, from that quiet rest, I wrote 6 meditations. I recorded a podcast. I was very creative, and that might not have come if I'd done the higher energy stuff, which I also find joyful.
Listen, quiet for me. My first ever podcast I recorded 3.5 years ago. I said on that, because I will ask you at the end. I've asked all my guests what makes them happy and where's their happy place. And it was to the question, what advice would you give your younger self? I said my advice to my younger self was to be more still, and I really appreciate now quietness. And I have tried. I have put this on social media. I have been trying since last year to have days of. I originally called them days of silence, and then I called them days of digital detox. But I am yearning for quiet. I'm yearning for
Yeah.
time in nature, time on my own, time at home on my own.
Mm.
I'm at that stage. We are both at that stage where our kids have now almost flown. I haven't quite flown the nest. I've got one here now. Almost flown the nest, and I've so embraced that quiet. So even people like me I know on social media it looks like I'm running around all the time, but I really crave, as you said at the beginning, our lives are chaos with all this
Yeah.
stuff
Yeah.
going on. We're 20, 30 years ago, we had quiet time. We used to have a quiet Sunday. Remember when
Mm.
you didn't go shopping on a
Mm.
Sunday, you rested
I
and
know.
you were
And then
quiet
there
on
was the
Sunday.
7-Eleven open, the 7-Eleven stores, and we were all very excited.
Yeah, but now it is continuous. It's hustle, hustle, bustle,
Mm.
bustle all the time. And Nerina, why is joy important for our physical and mental health?
Yeah, I think joy, I mean, as I've said, it's really one of Dr. David Hawkins' work showing that joy is such a high, it's a high level of consciousness. It's a healing experience. And I've listened to, the Julia talking about singing and the drumming, and they've both talked about the impact on the brain and serotonin levels and endorphin and oxytocin levels. So, it's well documented now that joy has such an impact on our health, a measurable impact. It changes the way your brain is wired. So it is it is the most, I think, the most powerful antidepressant. And I think, but we need to almost align our energies before we can plug into the experience of joy. So when I'm working, for example, when I worked in a psychiatric clinic, or when I'm working with corporate employees who are burnt out, and I'm going to be running some sessions for carers. In the UK, we have 50 unpaid carers in the UK. And they get to the point that they might start doing their job with a sense of joy and feeling enmissioned and purposeful, but then they get burnt out. And so I think, joy is almost like the icing on the cake, the cherry on the cake. And it's what you plug into when you take deep responsibility for yourself and for aligning your energy. And what I mean by that is physical energy, emotional energy, mental energy, spiritual energy. You look after yourself on those 4 levels. I talk about those 4 energies a lot of the time when I talk about joy. And then I think when we line our energies up, it gives us the opportunity to plug in to the ultimate healing potential of joy and the amazing cascade of physiological, biochemical things that take place when we start to feel joy. And I'll share honestly, I was feeling really down before I went out yesterday into the garden. I was worrying about things. I'm in those wonderful sandwich years of an elderly parent who is really not in a great state in her 80s with Alzheimer's and bedridden, and an angst-ridden Gen Z who's actually doing pretty well these days. But one still has these concerns, and she watches far too much social media that tells her that the world is not a good place. And so I'm holding space. We say in therapeutic terms, holding space for her. But I'm in that in between place where I took stock of where I was feeling in that moment. I was at my laptop and I thought, I have to do something. I have to choose something differently. So I thought I'd just go and do some housework, put some rubbish out, and then I suddenly thought I need to garden. I need to tidy up the front garden. And just by making that choice, it enabled me to biochemically change my state, physiologically change my state, which changed the whole trajectory of my day, which impacted on how I slept, which has impacted on how I feel today, which has impacted on my gym session, in which I did a give it all you've got weights, really heavy weights session. It's amazing. And that was 45 minutes of doing something I didn't have to pay anything for. But it just had this impact on my physiology. Now imagine, I don't know if Big Pharma would like it. That's a whole other subject. Can you imagine, though, if more people paid attention and listened more deeply and then made choices from that space? Can you imagine the impact it would have on mental health and sleep, given that sleep industry is worth billions of pounds?
I'm going to pick up on the gardening. Right. I'm looking. I interviewed, I interviewed 51 women for the book I'm writing now about good health and happiness. And gardening really was high on what brought them joy. And I love it that
Yeah.
you love it. I don't love it. I've tried. My garden's a total mess.
I don't love it. I like looking out and seeing it looking good. And that's why it gave me joy. Because actually, I kill things. It's awful. I'm that person who kills things. But yesterday I felt so smug and I felt and it was also the physical effort as well. I was in my Hindi squat pulling out the weeds and I was sort of stretching out from the exercise I'd done the previous day, and the dog was there and my daughter was looking at me, I think in admiration. Actually, I'm going to choose to think that. But there were a number of things that combined to make that a positive, joyful experience for me. But like you, I'm I'm not the world's greatest gardener, and I wish I could be that person. Give me a really good book, or tell me to go out on my mountain bike and do some serious hills in Richmond Park. Now we're talking. That's the kind of thing that really brings me joy. Or going to ecstatic dance or 5 rhythms. But I long to be that woman who has got the green fingers and is growing stuff that she eats. I'm not that person. So yesterday was an atypical biochemical response. But even a non-gardener could have had it. Worked. It worked yesterday.
They said some wonderful things about feeling the earth and things growing, and I
Mm.
was just like, oh, I have grown some great herbs this year. I have eaten them. But let's talk about, you mentioned about teaching people about joy and the care workers, and I think this is important. Should we be teaching about joy and happiness in companies, but also importantly in schools?
Oh gosh, absolutely, without a doubt. Absolutely, without a doubt. And I've done quite a lot of work in the education sector. And I spoke notably at a education conference last year in Coventry, where we had heads of education trusts and head teachers, as well as teachers. And I think that's where the work lies, to be honest. It's not so much with the children, but with those who are leading. And this applies to organizations as well. And why? Well, it's because we are constantly lending our nervous systems to the environments in which and spaces in which we find ourselves. So if I'd hopped onto this podcast to talk to you about joy, and I was feeling depressed because of whatever, X, Y, or Z, you would feel it. And you'd have to work extra hard to kind of be thinking, gosh, Nerina's a really hard guest to interview. You'd have to inject more of your joyousness into this conversation to elevate my state of consciousness, to just kind of G me up. And that'd be hard work for you. As it is, I feel we're kind of feeding off each other and your lovely smiling face and everything. I feel that, this is a joyful experience because we're both in a state of consciousness where energy is matched. Now, you go into schools, and to teach children in schools about joy, I think would be a little bit like swimming against the tide. It'd be a little bit like a needle in a haystack. I think the work lies in working with the teachers and the head teachers and putting it on their agenda. Because in my experience of working with schools, the teachers are exhausted. They are burnt out. They are knackered. They are trying their best, but they are exhausted. And if they're exhausted, they cannot exude joy. They cannot teach joy. And they will not be giving that, they will not be emanating that in their nervous systems in a way that creates that in the classrooms. So I know that as a speaker, my responsibility, if I go onto any platform, any stage, and I'm going to speak, I have got to integrate within my nervous system the emotions that I want my audience to listen to. And that is the hard work of doing the work that I do. And I know that you do the same as well. And I don't know how consciously, I imagine you do it consciously, but I do it very consciously because I'm not as naturally, innately joyful as you are. I want to point that out. I can be I think you know this about me, Joyce, so don't pretend you don't know it.
I
I can
do.
be a right miserable git at times. And I have to really consciously work. And I'm not going to be hard on myself. Look, I've had a messy childhood. There was a lot of complex trauma. There was a lot of hard stuff and big life events. And I got to this point where glass was definitely half empty. But what I've always known throughout my speaking career is that if I want to go into a space and teach about joy or exude joy, I have to almost create an infectious energy around me. If we were to look at scientifically what's happening, we could look at things like heart rate coherence. We could look at the work of the Heart Math Institute, for example, who show that if there is a leader leading a meeting and that leader is in a joyful, good state, if they're peaceful or at least mellow, if their energy is good, if they're in a thriving zone, the people around them will feel it. If, on the other hand, if they're in a high energy but they're surviving, it's an energy of anger and fear, and we have to do it like this. And, you cannot make a mistake. It doesn't create safety. And people might achieve, but they're achieving out of fear, not out of joy. And when they collapse, they collapse into exhaustion and burnout, and they go on holiday for 2 weeks, and they're sick for half their holiday. They have 1 week to actually have a holiday, and then they come back and they repeat the cycle. So I have seen in my almost 30 years of doing this work that if people sustainably want to have good energy in organizations and schools, we need to educate people about what good energy looks like, the energy of thriving. And at the high end of the spectrum, you have joy, but you also have it at the lower end. You can have lower end. You can get to that Friday night and you can think, God, I've worked really hard, but I feel peaceful, I feel calm, I feel mellow, and I feel this quiet feeling of joy of having done really good work. I'm tired. I'm looking forward to the weekend. You know, does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. And listen, before, we're both very joyful now, but before we came on, we both had Wi-Fi problems.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
yeah, we
Thanks
both
to my provider.
don't mention them. but we So well, we both had a problem, but we turned it around. And Nerina, you've
Mm.
mentioned your journey. So you have had a big healing journey, and you've been very open about your life struggles. You had a
Yes.
serious car accident, and you mentioned your insomnia. So how do we deal with these if we have problems in our life more than just some dodgy Wi-Fi? How can we turn
Mm.
that round?
Yeah. Okay, so can I just in 60 seconds just give a summary of the journey? I do come from a long history of trauma. And, I write about this in my fourth book, Finding Inner Safety, Ancestral Trauma. So both my parents came from highly traumatized backgrounds. So I grew up in a family where there was a lot of violence, domestic violence, and a mental ill health with my parents. And so, not surprisingly, this had an impact on my siblings and I. And I was very ill from my teens through to my 20s and into my mid 30s. So even when I was at university, I never talked about it. So even when you and I were friends, I hid that side of me. There were suicide attempts. There were all sorts happening even while I was at uni. And then I was sectioned in 1995. So it wasn't a serious car accident as such. I was coming home from a salsa club at 2 in the morning. I simply forgot how to drive. I had a psychosis. And the next day I was sectioned. And then I was diagnosed with complex trauma and bipolar disorder. So I was in and out of hospital for 4 years on different types of medication. And eventually there was something that told me I needed to step outside of all of the treatment. I'm not recommending that anyone do what I do. I came off medication. I walked out of therapy. I walked out of a marriage. I went off to Australia. I walked out. I was very high functioning. And we now know a lot about high functioning mental ill health. So I was achieving very well. I was doing really well in my career. I was a director at BUPA. I had my PhD, I had my postdocs. Um, but inside, mentally, I was a bit of a wreck. And you might remember I used to cancel a lot of social plans. And that was typically when I was crashing. But something told me that I needed to do life differently. And I went off to Australia, went to Brisbane, and basically went cold turkey, which is why I don't necessarily recommend that people do it the way I did back in the 90s. And now, thankfully, there's a lot more awareness of mental health and trauma, and there's more support out there. But there wasn't much of that. People didn't talk about these things. Those labels weren't used. But what happened is I had some kind of an awakening experience, which came about as a result of just quietening my life, stepping out of it completely. And I started journaling. I would go to the same a coffee shop in a bookshop, Mary Ryan's bookshop. I still have a mug that they gave me as a gift when I left. I'd go there every day. I went to Australia to travel, but I was terrified. I wasn't one of those people because of my own trauma history. I wasn't very good at traveling. I was scared. And I'd just go to this bookshop and just sit there and write. And I was surrounded by all of these amazing books like Neil Donald Walsh's book, Conversations with God, Louise Hay, You Can Heal Your Life, The Celestine Prophecy, Anatomy of the Spirit, Caroline Myss. I was surrounded by these books, which I started, I don't know, almost imbibing. But something happened. And there was one day back then in 1999 where there was a distinct moment where I put my pen down and I was drinking a latte and I looked up and I felt something land in my body. And that was my first conscious experience of joy. It was my conscious experience of joy and feeling safe in myself, you know? So, how do people start to heal? When I run my programs, I encourage people to start from the inside out. And it's difficult because we do have access to all these programs that people can attend, and they're wonderful, and there are lots of groups, and there are retreats, and there are lots of things and lots of things and lots of things that they can do. And that in itself has become a noise and created noise and overwhelm. And I was talking to a psychotherapist about this at the gym the other day, and she was saying she's seeing a lot of people who are going to retreats and festivals and sitting in groups and having not great experiences and coming away and needing to have some serious therapy afterwards because the space is not being held appropriately. So you've got to do your due diligence. And then how do people know what to ask, though? And I certainly had my fair share of bad retreats. I've been doing the retreat space, for about 20 years now. So I know what good space holding is and I know what bad space holding is. But I think if you were to start, if you're listening to this podcast, I would say start simple. Honor your sleep, because sleep is, I have some famous poet who said sleep is the golden thread. I'm paraphrasing, the golden thread that unites mind, body, and spirit. And I have noticed time and again that people with mental health problems often will have an issue with sleep. And if I can help them to sleep well, to honor their sleep, it kind of sets them on a trajectory of healing. They start to feel better. Their energy and nervous system, the autonomic, starts to reset from living in the survival sympathetic nervous system to starting to access the healing parasympathetic nervous system. So how do you do that? Well, I have my 5 non-negotiables. I'm happy for you to share a link in the show notes that people can plug into the 5 things that will change your relationship with sleep. Or and not or and start your days differently. Start your days differently. Start your day differently and end your day differently. Start your day not on your phone. My phone is, I don't want to, I'm not saying this to be smug, but I'm as addicted as the next person, you know. Um, and it got worse during COVID because I got very lonely. I was on my own, I was living on my own. And it got that I just wanted to look at my phone first thing in the morning. I now have a habit around my phone is always switched off and it's in another room charging. It's not even switched on and charged, switched off and charging. I have an old-fashioned clock beside my bed, which doesn't tick, doesn't make any noises, so it doesn't keep me awake. When I wake up in the morning, I don't look at my phone for at least half an hour or so. And trust me, Joyce, I'm dying to get on my phone and see what's happened overnight. Especially if I'm like you, I've got international clients as well. But what I do is I keep my eyes closed when I wake up in the morning. I put my hands over my heart, or one on my heart, one on my belly, and I just notice. I just notice. And what am I noticing? I'm noticing the speed of my thoughts. I'm noticing the absolute, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on your podcast,
Oh,
but the
yes.
absolute shitstorm in my brain, absolute shitstorm of I have to do this and I have to do that and that won't happen, and my mum and my daughter and the this and the that and the blah 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 blah. And I just notice it. I become the observer of it. And I come back to my breath. And then I lovingly, often, if I notice that voice is particularly punitive, I hug myself. And you and I, the last time we met on the South Bank, we talked about self-compassion. And one of the things I love about you is that you have a lot of self-compassion. You're kind to yourself. But I don't believe that we can step into the space of joy unless we are kind and compassionate towards ourselves. And so for me, a big step towards accepting and allowing joy has been to allow myself to be kind to myself. And so I'll do a very simple, it's based on military psychiatry. Sometimes it's called a havening technique, where I put my arms around myself and I go, I've got you, Nerina. I love you. I love you. We've got this. And I parent my little girl back into the day. And just saying this right now almost brings tears to my eyes, because I had to do it this morning. Because when I wake up, the horizontal brain can tell you a shed load of shite. It's very difficult to, once I'm up and I'm moving, and while I'm feeding the animals, I was listening to free, because I'm free, alternate, and I'm jigging around. I'm in a good space. But often when I wake up first thing in the morning, that reptilian brain, the monkey brain, is telling me that I'm not safe. And that is my trauma history. But it's not who I am now. And I can choose to believe that, or I can just listen. And sometimes all it takes is noticing 3 to 5 breaths. And I go, that's where I am. So let me start with some kindness, first of all. And today I'm going to do some meditation because I've noticed I'm being really unkind. And it's going to be really important for me to eat a good breakfast, because my physiology feels like it's a little bit out of kilter this morning. Now, for some people, it might not be breakfast. As you know, we've debated this.
We have.
But in my sleep protocol, people who have difficulty getting to sleep or staying asleep or have non-refreshing sleep, especially women in perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause, you really want to dampen the cortisol response first thing in the morning. So, eat. Tell your hunter-gatherer physiology that you're safe. That means stabilize your blood sugar levels. And that might be the act of the first act of self-compassion, you know? So the steps to healing, I I have very simple steps, which start with my 5 non-negotiables, the few breaths in the morning, ending your day on a good note. I personally always end my day by saying thank you. And sometimes I'm just saying thank you to my bed. I just love my bed. I'm a sleep expert for some big brands, and I'm really blessed. I get lovely gifts, I get lovely merch, and my bed was gifted by one of the leading sleep brands. But I just love my bed, and I also use a lot of amazing, just simple oils on my bed. I use a lot of Olbus oil, a combination of Olbus and lavender, and honestly, I kid you not, the smell of my bed gives me joy. The smell of my bed, the feel of my pillow. And so I'm saying thank you to my bed, that there are people in the world who don't have this. They don't have this bed, the feel of this pillow. I have a rescue dog beside me from Cyprus. She loves me unconditionally. And so I reach over and I just like wiggle her snout and twiddle her ears, and it just brings me joy. I just know that she loves me. I feel loved. And so even though I might be worrying about my mother, or might be worrying about the project that hasn't come good, or the whatever, I know that these little things can bring a soft whisper of joy, which takes me into those first stages of sleep, feeling safe, you know? And I might rinse and repeat if I wait during the night. Don't go on your phone. Don't look at the clock. If you need to pee, go pee. Don't lie there thinking, why am I peeing? Why do I have to pee 3 times? I said this to my hairdresser yesterday. Stop counting the number of times you're peeing during the night and just go and pee. Don't make it an issue. There's so many sleep problems, which aren't sleep problems, but people make them an issue. But, when you come back to bed, do the same thing. I love you. Rest. You're allowed to rest. You are allowed to rest. And then you might think, what are you looking forward to? Then you can bring in the gratitude practices or the other joy practices. I'm looking forward to going drumming. I'm looking forward to swimming. I'm looking forward to, one of the things I would love to do, I must listen to your podcast on traveling solo, because that's a goal for me. I really want to get good at that.
Deb is great. I got really inspired, and I mentioned to somebody today who hasn't booked a holiday, and her husband doesn't want to go, and I said,
Mm,
"Listen to that podcast and go." But I am definitely going away on my own, and I've got a camper van, so I do go off on my own.
yeah.
My quietness. But you mentioned morning and evening rituals, and in my book, I have in the interviews I have exactly asked women what were their morning and evening
Mm,
rituals. I think they're really really key,
mm,
and gratitude. Thinking about gratitude, I think that is really important. I think how we frame our day, especially when we wake up, is really important. And I do check my phone because one of my sons is in America, and he sends me messages when he's awake and I'm asleep, and yeah. So unfortunately, yeah. But anyway, well, there's lots of things we can do
But
around that.
also, Joyce, you're a good sleeper. I know
Yeah,
this about you.
yeah.
You're a really good sleeper. So there's a kind of, you wouldn't be, if too many people were like you, I wouldn't have a job.
Sorry.
With respect, but a lot of people in my sleep methodology, I divide people into sensitive sleepers and the martini sleepers, and it's nothing to do with alcohol. But your martini sleepers can sleep anytime, any place, anywhere. They don't know why I people like me exist. Whereas, like me, I was a very sensitive sleeper, and I'm seeing a lot more sensitive sleepers, particularly in the neurodivergent space. In fact, I'm being interviewed by Ben Branson next week. He has the Hidden 20% podcast, the creator of Seedlit Gems. And we're going to be talking about neurodivergence and sleep, because it can be an issue with a lot of neurodivergence. And I'm seeing a lot of that in my work. And so you need extra self care. And that includes things like, even what you watch before you go to sleep. And I have to be very careful, and my daughter has now learned that she has to be very careful. We were watching the new series of Dexter, And I had to say, look, I cannot watch this too soon to go into bed. I'm powering down. I just can't. And, it is quite cartoon-like in many respects. But even I was watching, what was it, the mixtapes on BBC iPlayer, which are absolutely, I mean, that was a joy. But it was quite sad and poignant as well. So I decided last night, no, I'm not watching the last episode before I go to bed. I need to go to bed and do a little bit of journaling. One of the things I recommend that people do is something called vomit journaling. So if you're going to bed, if you want to access a bit of joy and gratitude before you, because sometimes you cannot go to bed feeling grateful because you're so overwhelmed by the worry and the upset and the hurt and the whatever. And so to say to someone, do a gratitude exercise before you go to bed is just too far a leap for them. Vomit journaling is amazing. You set a timer for 5 to 10 minutes and you literally vomit out onto the page, preferably on paper, not into your phone. There's something about the neurological connection between the brain and writing with pen on paper that's very different. It's almost hypnotic, and it has a measurable impact on serotonin levels. So you get some paper and you just literally vomit, well, not literally vomit, but you know what I mean. Write out all the things that are bothering you, all the things that you're worrying. Go to the worst case scenario, exaggerate if you have to, and write them all out onto paper. And if you have to tear it up and throw it across the room, but don't read it, don't analyze it, don't go into a mental health trough of, oh my goodness, look at my life. And the whole point is to get it out of your reptilian brain so that you can then access possibly that space of, okay, what one thing do I feel grateful for today? And it might be just gratitude for writing your vomit journal, but I think what happens with gratitude exercises, and the reason it's good to talk about gratitude is because I think gratitude is a tipping point for joy. I think all of these emotions are very connected. And I think that when we start to feel gratitude, it gives us the possibility that we can start to access a state of joy. And this is what happened to me yesterday, going out gardening. I go out there and I just think, God, this is really good. I can actually do this. I can take some time out from my work. I can step away from the laptop. I've got my dog with me. I've got my cat. I've got my daughter singing in the kitchen. I feel really grateful. And from gratitude, it tipped into joy. But particularly before you go to sleep, it's the vomit journaling could be a really way of segueing into a lovely gratitude practice.
That's beautiful, really beautiful. And Nerina, I called this mini series "Reclaiming Joy," and you and I had a conversation about this because when we were talking about doing this together, you said, "Well, it's a good title because it means that many people have lost joy. They've had joy and then lost joy,
Yes,
and then they need to
yes,
reclaim it.
yes.
So how do we lose it? Why have we got to reclaim it?"
I know, because I believe that it is our innate essence. And it's going to sound possibly a bit woo-woo. I don't really like the label woo-woo. I mean, my second publisher actually with HarperCollins, she was wonderful, Carolyn Thorne, and she would say, "I hate those words woo-woo. Can you extract them from your book? Don't like it." But I've noticed that in your podcast, as you've journeyed your journey of podcasting, you've started introducing more esoteric, dare I say, spiritual concepts, and I think our essence, our innate spiritual nature. And in fact, Dr. David Hawkins says that to feel joy is spiritual. And I think that when a child is born, that's in its innate essence. And there are many tribal people in Africa and in the Amazon who believe that what's it called again? The fontanelle. Is it the fontanelle? The depression in the top of the brain.
Mm.
That they believe that was the connection to the heavens. And so when a child is born, it's innately joyful because it's connected to the heavens, and then that closes over. And we then have to start looking for our joy. And then we go through these 7-year life cycles where we start becoming more and more disciplined and more behave yourself and sit down and don't move and don't laugh and don't play and all this sort of thing. And it literally starts stamping the joy out of us. And then you enter the value system of higher education and the value system of the university and the value system of your first employers. And little by little. Um, and then that's not even to look at the family experience, the value system of your families. Now, just from a personal point of view, I think I was very joyful. I had moments of joy. I remember pockets of joy as a child, and they were typically when I was doing things like climbing trees and stealing bicycles and riding them, because I wasn't allowed to have a bicycle. My dad felt that this wasn't something that girls should do. And I celebrate now because I now have 3 bicycles. But back then, I was told you're not allowed to do that. But I remember that feeling of freedom and joy. And and then life happened, and mental health issues and deaths and endings and losses and marriages ending and blah 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 blah. And it kind of it squeezes this out of you. So reclaiming is entirely appropriate because we do need to remember that it is our innate essence. We're not recreating it. We're just going, that was me. But what I need to keep asking myself is what makes me joyful? I'm going to do that. What would make me joyful in this moment where we have, and it might be that, yeah, you do need to get into that inbox and get through the work. But can you make it a little bit more joyful? Can you stand up? Can you jig around? Can you put some gentle music on? Can you go and stretch? Can you go and pat the dog or something? How could you make this just a tiny bit more joyful so that even the act, and then, this sometimes when I'm working with people, coaching them, it then brings up the conversation of what they're spending their time doing is squeezing the life force out of them. It doesn't fit their value system, it doesn't fit their why. And so it might be that they do need to leave that job or walk out of a relationship because it's so difficult for them to access that given their circumstances. But I was sitting on the train on the way back, on the plane rather, on the way back from Croatia, and I was thinking about this because we were stuck there on the tarmac and we were very tired. It was past midnight, and again, I won't mention the airline, but they kept delaying and delaying and delaying. In fact, I'm still annoyed with them. I feel like I want to mention it, but all the adults were, you know, and then there were some kids on the little ones, and they were playing, and they were really creative in their play, and they were really noisy. And of course, the adults were getting really annoyed. And I was getting a bit annoyed because it was kind of, they were in front of me and they were thumping my chair. But I was also, there was a part of me that was going, I really envy their ability to just be joyful. And they're actually, they've still managed to find that in quite difficult situation. They've managed to access that joy, regardless of the kind of murderous looks they're being given, both them and their parents, you know. But I do feel it's in our innate essence, actually, and I feel that these days, given the noise that's coming at us and the state of chaos and the political and the wars and everything, it is our responsibility to reclaim it because we can pray for others, we can care for others, we can have compassion for others, but it has to start with ourselves. And it has to start by allowing ourselves to feel grateful and contented and happy and joyful. And then we fill our pots up, we put our oxygen masks on, going back to the airplane analogy, and then we can give from a full cup, you know? So one of the things I actually very consciously do is that I don't really watch too much news. I know what's happening in the world. I can feel it. I don't watch it. I just have to go to the local supermarket and I can feel what's happening in the world from the state of consciousness of the people around me or on the roads. So
I'm the same. I think self-preservation, self-care, self-love are essential and non-negotiable. I have never ever listened to the news in my life, and I've never read a newspaper
mm,
in my life.
mm.
And as a result, I'm really terrible as your teammate on pop quizzes or,
I
or
am too.
pub quizzes, or any type
Yes,
of quiz.
yeah,
Terrible.
yeah. How amazing that I didn't know this about you, Joyful Joyce. I didn't know that about you. Because I always felt slightly embarrassed that I got 3 really good A levels in my physics, chemistry, biology, and an E in my general studies because I just didn't know what was happening half the time. But I can feel what's happening a lot of the time. I can feel it, and I do think we have a responsibility not to immerse ourselves in it, and this particularly for the young people who are bombarding themselves. And I had to say to my daughter, we're not allowed to talk about certain US presidents at breakfast, darling, when we're on holiday. No. And yesterday we actually ended up going to the garden center, and I said, you're only coming with me if all we can talk about is stuff that makes us laugh. You're not allowed to tell me what you saw on TikTok that was horrific or horrible. And we had a wonderful time. So, we've got to make mindful choices to guard our mental health, particularly at the moment.
We do. And I know some people feel that with what's happening in the world that they want to be more active, and I totally appreciate that. But yeah,
Mm.
for me, I know some people think it's selfish, but Nerina, I wanted to finish talking about your book. So you've written 3 books on sleep, and then your last book was called Finding Inner Safety. Tell us a little bit about your
Mm.
books.
Yeah, so Tired But Wired was the first one that I wrote as a result of magically being headhunted to work at the same psychiatric clinic where I'd been the patient, the Capio Nightingale. And it was when I was working there that I realized I'd created a sleep methodology that it worked. If I could work with people who had severe mental health problems and severe depressions, addictions, eating disorders, I realized that if I could help them, then I was onto something. So it gave me the courage to write Tired But Wired. And the label Tired But Wired came from working in that health screening laboratory when I was working with those corporate employees, professional service employees, and I would say, "Do you feel tired but wired?" And they said, "Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. You should write a book by that title." And so I always wanted to write a book called Tired but Wired. So I wrote that book, and then as my journey with sleep, and I sleep really well, and I am sporting a wearable at the moment. It's a well-known ring. It's a brand. It was gifted to me by the company. But I was dragged kicking and screaming into the 21st century of wearable technology. But I must say, it told me my sleep score this morning was 90%. So I was really smug because I did feel I'd slept really well last night. But each of my books, there was, I suppose, what was emerging in me was my own sense of it's not just about the science. It's not just about Western medicine, how we heal our relationship with sleep. It's also about bringing in Eastern medicine. And so I wanted to talk more about the ancient sciences of Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine. So in each of the books, the second one was Fast Asleep, Wide Awake, I started introducing more of the more considered to be esoteric practices, but these are very old sciences, Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine, and Reiki, and bringing that into the books, um, and also the theme of inner safety. So I noticed I was giving a presentation in a packed auditorium. It was Linklaters. And this was over a decade and a half ago. And I noticed that this phrase shot out of my mouth. I said, "We sleep when we feel safe. We sleep when we feel safe." And I realized that there was this connection between feeling unsafe, living in the sympathetic nervous system, and feeling safe in the parasympathetic, restorative, safety part of the nervous system. We sleep when the hunter-gatherer, the caveman, the cave woman they perceive that they are safe. Then it switches on the parasympathetic and all of the sleep physiology and the circadian, science. But if we don't feel safe, it overrides a lot of that. We can't sleep. So even when I wrote Tired But Wired, I wanted to talk about inner safety, that thing that had landed for me in 1999. But the world wasn't ready for it. So each book that I wrote was a bridge to the fourth book, which was finally commissioned in 2021. And it was published in 2022, Finding Inner Safety, which is, it touches a lot on sleep. And if people read the book, they will sleep better because a lot of the tools I talk about in my books, which are more pure sleep related, are covered in that book as well. But it also talks about healing trauma, big T and little t trauma, everyday stresses, but also going back into your early 0 to 7 years, 8 to 14 years, the first 2 life stages, or even going back epigenetically into generational trauma. I come from a long history of trauma. My ancestors traveled as indentured slaves from India to the Caribbean. So there was a lot of alcohol abuse, incest, um, domestic violence, and there was that is in my DNA. But we can override those trajectories. We can override it. So this fourth book that was commissioned, Finding Inner Safe, is actually my favorite. I mean, I love them all, but I really feel that this fourth book is relevant for today's world. And it was funny because back then it was almost commissioned by Penguin in February. I forget the years now of the pandemic, but just before we went into the first long lockdown, Penguin said to me, "What are you writing about?" They contacted me on LinkedIn. "What are you writing about?" I said, "I'm writing about safety." They said, "People won't know what that's about. Um, so we don't think that's a relevant book." And then Wiley contacted me. But the interesting thing was that the month later we went into the first lockdown and everyone was talking about not feeling safe. Suddenly safety was on the agenda. And now the whole issue of psychological safety is people are talking about it in organizations. But I still feel that they're missing a trick, because I think we need to talk about physiological safety, the physiology within the body, before leaders can impart safety to their teams, their organizations, or before teachers can impart this to their students. They have to exude it. They have to find it embodied in their own bodies. They have to change their nervous system. And that's what I'm talking about in a lot of my keynotes these days. It's about the lending of the nervous system. There we go. Long-winded answer to your question. I'm
And
sorry. It's my
no,
passion.
brilliant, brilliant. So, anyone listening, if you want to hear more from Nerina, please, I'll put the link to your website, and please read her
Thank
books,
you.
and hopefully listen to her speaking. So, Nerina, we're at the end, but I've always asked all my guests these questions, but it seems even more important to discuss with you. What makes you happy, and where is your happy place?
Mm. There are so many happy. This is one of my happy places. Doing work that has meaning and purpose, work that can make a difference. This is definitely one of my happy places. So for me, I feel very enmissioned in my work, as I believe you do as well. But I can also get that quiet feeling of happiness sitting in my favorite red velvet chair that I gifted to myself one Valentine's. And I sit there and I'm drinking my coffee with mushrooms in it, legal, I have to add. And I've got my dog at my feet, and I'm just thinking, I can do this. I can just sit here, feeling good in my skin, nothing particularly happening, but I'm feeling good in my skin. But it can also be, like I said, doing those things, being out on my bike. It could be dancing, meaningful conversations. And I think I've really learned a lot of this from you as well. You're such an extrovert, such a live wire. And increasingly, I'm noticing that, you know, I used to be that dog walker who didn't really talk to many people, oh, I need my quiet, I'm a highly sensitive, introverted, blah, blah, blah. And I've now noticed that actually it gives me great joy to have conversations with people. And yeah, I like a deep conversation. I'm not going to be the person who just wants to talk about the weather or world news. No, no, no. Don't go on a dog walk with me. But can we, and I don't like getting caught up in the dramas of lives. I love when we can drop down and we can go a little bit deeper, and we can have conversations about what sparks us, what lights us up, what makes us feel juicy and delicious and amazing. I love conversations like that. Um, and then I can be really shallow. I could be watching Below Deck with my daughter, and the fact that she wants to sit there and watch that with me, and it takes us 2 hours to watch one episode because we pause it every 5 minutes and discuss the dynamics and what does this mean about relationships, and what are we, and that's when we have our deepest conversations you know when I went back to Guyana recently to visit my mum, who's leaving basically in many respects, I sat there and I drummed with her for 15 minutes, and then we sang Sanskrit chants, because we're Hindus. My mum's a Hindu, and my mum started chanting and singing. That gave me deep joy, touched with grief. And I would love to also say that the two can exist in the same space. The two, sorrow and joy, can exist in the same space. So I think I can feel joy while at carrying sadness at the same time. And I think that's important that people understand that they're not distinct from each other. I think it's the poet Gibran, who says, "Your joy is your sorrow unmasked. Your joy is your sorrow unmasked." And so I think being courageous to step into those places of sorrow and those places where things can be hard, and to sit with it and sit in the red velvet chair and allow the grief. And then always, if I'm being brave enough to do that, and I don't always manage to do it, but if I can do it, inevitably there will be some joy that will come through at some point. It's the rainbow, you know. So my happy places are many and varied. Finding a good book. I'm a bookworm. I think you are as well. Nothing like a good book. But for me, it's not the stereotypical going on holiday. I can get deeply bored on holiday. You know, and even on my lovely holiday in Croatia, I got bored, and then a piece of work came in, and you know, it was an interview, a life in the day of a sleep expert, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this 1 hour interview, and I loved it because I love what I do. It brings me joy.
Yeah, and I love what you said about grief as well. But I was at a funeral a few weeks ago, and obviously a funeral is a very, very sad occasion. But listening to his wonderful life did make us all
Yeah,
feel joy for
yeah.
sure. That he did have a. We all learned things about him we didn't know, and it's amazing. Okay, Nerina, the very final question.
Mm.
It's just some people find this a bit hard. What advice would you give your younger self?
Oh, don't make me cry. Don't make me cry. Uh, I would say, and now I'm closing my eyes and I have my hand on my heart, and I'd say, little Nerina, you are a joyful little spark. And don't forget that. Don't forget it. And don't let life squash it out of you. And there may be some times when it gets a little bit tricky and it might get a little bit hard from time to time. And you might cry, you might fall over and scrape your knee. There might be knocks and falls, but there is joy, and you are allowed. You are effing well allowed to have it and to reach for it. You are allowed, and never stop reaching for it. And it's an experiment. So keep trying different things, and you'll never stop learning what brings you joy. You will continue learning your entire life. That's what I would say to little Nerina.
And I do, having known you for a long time, I think you are definitely more joyful now than ever.
I know, I know. I was a miserable git for those years. It was pretty hard. Some of that was, and you know, I just wasn't ready. And in all honesty, I think sometimes I felt quite jealous of you. Oh God, she's so relentlessly happy. I can't be like that. I don't know how to be like that. But it's a journey, isn't it? It's a journey. So we have many joyful times ahead, Joyce.
We
You know,
do.
and it's been an absolute joy to be on your podcast. I've loved it.
Oh, thank you so much, Serena. I'm sure people listening will get something from this. And just to note that Nerina has kindly agreed to come and talk about sleep on our World Menopause Day uh, webinar, sort of panel discussion that we're holding. I'm so pleased this year. The theme for World Menopause Day is lifestyle medicine, which is totally up our
Yes.
street. I know that's why I wanted to
Oh,
mention
yes.
it.
Hell yes.
Oh my God. So we're going to talk about, we've got Professor Amy Spector talking about mental health, which I'm sure all of us can talk about as well. You're going to talk about sleep. I'm not going to tell you who I'm trying
Mm-hmm.
to convince to talk about food. And then Dr. Lawrence, who does
Ooh,
loads on Instagram about exercise and debunking all the myths, she's going to come and talk about exercise. So listen in
brilliant.
to hear Nerina and I talking again for when we'll be recording it as well. We're going to record it live sometime in October before World Menopause Day, but it'll be on our social medias after that. So Nerina, always a big part. I want to give you a big hug now, but we will see each other very soon, and we'll have a dance, and we always eat some
Very soon, please.
we eat lovely food, and it's all
I'd love that.
wonderful. And thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.